Hello, so I've made this presentation called The Intelligence Problem and a Brief History of Human Evolution. Before we begin, my intention is to impart information in a respectful and peaceable manner to viewers so that they may act as informed citizens when voting for policy and representatives in their respective democracies. I do not condone hatred of any national, racial, or religious group, nor do I wish to incite hostility or violence. Here's a quote from C.S. Lewis. "If you look for truth, you may find comfort in the end. If you look for comfort, you will not get either comfort nor truth, only soft soap and wishful thinking to begin, and in the end, despair." So I am going to be talking about some uncomfortable truths today. I'm going to discuss race, I'm going to discuss intelligence, and I'm going to discuss stereotyping. One of the main reasons people are afraid to discuss these topics is because the human race does have a history of violence, oppression, and discrimination based on different ethnicities and different races, different religions. And of course, this is not something people want to repeat. The vast majority of people view this as horrible and are not proud of their ancestors having participated in it. Naturally, I think we'd all agree that we don't want to see scenes like this happen ever again. So many people have jumped to the opposite end of the spectrum and decided that we are all equal. End of story, nothing to talk about. In fact, this whole idea of equality is not just something that is accepted by most people, it's something that is actively pushed on people in our society at the moment. I think I can make a fairly good argument that equality is a human construct. It's a social construct. It has nothing to do with science, biology, evolutionary biology, or anthropology. And unfortunately, discussions about the actual scientific findings in these areas are often completely squelched by people who are too eager to enforce equality at any cost. However, nature doesn't care. Nature never got the memo about equality. And I'd like to invite you to actually look at these findings that I'm going to talk about from the perspective of an alien. I want to completely take you out of social constructs and social ideas. I want you to look at this like an objective scientist, like an alien who doesn't care about human differences or human histories, and just look at the facts as they are. So the question is, are all humans the same? How our evolutionary histories differ? So let's just get straight to it. Humans migrated out of Africa, depending on who you ask, between 160,000 years ago. On this image it says 80,000 years ago. As you can see, humans moved out of Africa into the Middle East. At that point, they met Neanderthals. Some of them interbred with Neanderthals. Some of them moved into Europe, some of them moved into Russia, some of them moved into Asia, and some of them moved down to Oceania. So we're left with a situation where Europeans have about 3% Neanderthal DNA, whereas the vast majority of Africans that stayed in Africa have no Neanderthal DNA. And here you can see it in a diagram. You can see how Neanderthals broke off from our common ancestor. They were actually considered a completely separate species. Some humans then interbred with Neanderthals and became the ethnicities that we see today, whereas other humans did not interbreed with Neanderthals. The ones that did interbreed with Neanderthals are actually a form of hybrid between two different species. If you have any doubt about whether species can actually have fertile offspring, just look at bears and polar bears. They are clearly different species. They're completely adapted for different environments, and they can interbreed with fertile offspring. Just a little bit about Neanderthals. Neanderthals lived in Ice Age Europe. They intentionally buried their dead. They made hunting trophies from the paws of panthers. They wore shells, feathers, and body paint. They had at least rudimentary language and communicated symbolically through cave painting. They fashioned the most advanced stone tools of all other hominoids at that time, and they were the first creators of synthetic glue. It's theorized that by interbreeding with Neanderthals, humans were able to adapt to the very cold climate in Europe at that time, in ways that they would not otherwise have been able to do so quickly. Neanderthals also happened to have much larger heads than humans do today, including larger brain capacity. And this is an example of a cave painting. As you can see, it's far more advanced than any art I could do, and probably most people alive today could do, unless they studied art, of course. It's theorized that they were not as primitive as they have been made out to be. Here's another diagram just showing you the flow of migration of early humans. You can see that a group of humans broke off and went down to Australia, some went to Southeast Asia, some went all the way through East Asia and to the Americas, while others stayed in Africa. And this was over a phase of at least 60,000 years, depending on who you ask. Just so you have a little bit more understanding of the Ice Age. The last major ice age ended about 10,000 years ago. Anatomically, modern humans have existed for about 100,000 years. During the Ice Age, two distinct species of humans coexisted: Homo sapiens, modern humans, and Homo neanderthalensis, Neanderthals. And there's one of the type of mammoths that European ancestors actually hunted during the Ice Age. And just so you know, the Ice Age wasn't like just a little bit of frost or anything. It was actually sheets of ice. It was literally, sometimes you'd be walking on miles thick of ice above the ground. And you can see all the locations on the map of where the ice was located. So here's a question: does race exist? Or is it just a social construct? More recently, Western scientists have started coming out saying that race doesn't exist and that it's just a social construct. I find it quite difficult to buy this, and this is the reason why. When we look at genetic studies documented by researchers, we can see that the groups of, now I'm not a geneticist, so I don't even know what these things are called, it might be halotype groups, but we can see that these groups are clustered in what reasonably represents 5 different races. And if you look at the yellow box, that's the Asian race. This is the group of people we currently refer to as Asians. You can see it's actually overlapping a little bit into the Austronesian race, which includes the South Chinese, the Thai, and the Mon Khmer. So those are people we refer to as Asian, but if you look at their genes, they're actually Austronesian. However, on the whole, we have generally been calling people the correct race according to their DNA. So for me, this is strong enough evidence to support the idea of a race. We have groups of people who, for centuries, we've been identifying as members of specific races, and then when we do the genetic analysis, we find that they are in fact grouped in this way. So again, going back to the idea of aliens, looking at this from an objective perspective, if aliens had genetic technology, which I assume they would, because they have to be very advanced to be able to come here, would they be able to run this kind of analysis and see these different groups for what they are? Well, I think they certainly would. And that's why I don't believe that race is a social construct. If aliens from another star system could understand this, then it's not a social construct, it's just a biological fact. So the next question, just as controversial, are there differences on the inside too? So here we have a group of Australian Aborigines, and it looks like the woman in the white shirt is Indian. So here I want to show you something you've probably never seen before. This human male Australian Aboriginal skull was found in 1905 near the Lower Darlington River in New South Wales, Australia, and was known to be from a very stout 50-year-old male of the Bindaboo tribe. This skull probably looks different to other skulls you've seen, since normally in textbooks and on TV we see classic European skulls. So I just want to show you, going back and forward, the differences between these two skulls. There's definitely a difference in the top of the head, around the eyes, the jaw, and the nose. So they are very different. And now I'm going to show you an African skull. So again, this is more similar to the European skull, I think, or it's almost in between. I'm just going to go back and forth and show you. So again, we see differences in the ridge of the eyes, the nose area, the jaw, and a little bit the top of the head, but not that much. So I think it's fair to say that this is not just about skin color, there are also clearly physiological differences between races. Moving on, is race and IQ linked? And what if it is? Firstly, of course, this information is routinely shut down. Channel 4 to screen controversial documentary that asks whether IQ is linked to race. Channel 4 is facing a race controversy after deciding to give a platform to scientists who claim that white people are more intelligent than those who are black. Obviously, this was a huge controversy just because we don't openly talk about this kind of thing on a regular basis. It's considered to be wrong to do so by some people. However, this is what the science tells us about the race of native peoples. So, if you see the highest IQ is yellow, and we can see that the Japanese and Chinese are very much yellow. They have an IQ of about 105. The light orange is 100. Most of Europe and Russia and parts of Asia are light orange with an IQ of about 100. Then it goes down a little bit, and obviously you can see the countries and where they are. But for the reddest is in sub-Saharan Africa and in Australia, where the native people have an average IQ of about 60. And here we see what the current IQs are of the populations inhabiting the countries. So of course we see that the IQ of the US and Canada has gone up since Europeans settled there. The same with Australia, the IQ has gone up since Europeans settled there. The IQ in much of Africa is still extremely low. The IQ in Argentina and Chile has gone up since Europeans settled there. Basically, anything below 80 is considered to be borderline intellectual functioning. Anything below that is pretty much considered to be mentally retarded, which is, of course, part of why this research is taken in such an emotional way by a lot of people. It's considered to be insulting, and that it just shouldn't be shared because it's just wrong to offend people in that way. Does IQ really measure intelligence, or is it biased and/or inaccurate? And here we have the black-white IQ distribution curve of America. So here's a picture from the 100-meter sprint in the 2012 London Olympics. It seems to me that most of these men seem to be of African descent. At least they all are fairly dark-skinned. These people are racing for the US, these people are racing for the UK, these people are racing for every different nation that's been entered into the Olympics, and yet they all look remarkably similar. We see exactly the same thing with the London Olympics 2012 100-meter sprint for the females. Now, when this kind of thing happens, do we call it racism? Do we say that white people and Asians are being discriminated against? Or do we just assume that these people have inherited traits that make them better at sprinting than others? Now we see the 16 wealthiest individuals in the world. The commonality is that they are all white. And of course, many people will say that this is due to racism, that blacks are being oppressed by whites, and that's why they are not as wealthy as whites. However, research documents that IQ is directly correlated with income. For example, if your IQ is 85, you're probably making about $70,000, and you probably have savings of less than $30,000. Whereas if your IQ is above 125, you probably make more than $120,000 and have a net worth of more than $120,000. Since the black population in America has an average IQ of 85 and the white population has an average IQ of 100, this could easily explain the difference in income between the two groups. This is an alternative explanation to it being systemic racism, as is most popularly argued. Here we have black-white percentages by NFL occupation. So as you can see, the players are mostly black people, the coaches are mainly white, the head coaches are mainly white, the general managers are mainly white, the vice presidents are mainly white, the CEOs are mainly white, the owners are mainly white. IQ may be able to explain this quite easily. If your IQ is below 85, it's necessary for you to be in a job that is highly supervised, whereas people with IQ over 115 are able to gather their own information. These are more likely to be people like attorneys, chemists, and executives. Superimposed on the back here, the red arch is the white IQ curve and the yellow arch is the black IQ curve. So it makes a lot of sense when you see the IQ difference that you can actually understand why there is a difference in where you see different races of people represented in different jobs in America. So why does this matter? This is where politics comes in. We have affirmative action. So for example, in schools, African Americans receive a bonus of 230 points on their SAT exams when they're applying for colleges, whereas Hispanics receive a bonus of 185 points. Asians are actually penalized by 50 points, all in the name of affirmative action, education, and employment. Many Western countries enforce quotas for educational institutions, private companies, and political parties based on race and sex in an attempt to promote equality of outcomes. So what does this mean? This means that there are Asians and white people out there who are essentially being discriminated against. There are people who would have got jobs that they didn't get because of these quotas. There are people who would have got into medical school but they didn't get into medical school because of these quotas, and someone else who actually likely has a lower IQ than them was put in their place in an attempt to manufacture equality. And of course we have groups like Black Lives Matter. The truth is that Black Americans are 9 times more likely to resist arrest than whites, yet are shot less often comparatively. Despite this, Black Lives Matter movement claims that blacks are unfairly targeted. The reality is that blacks in America commit far more crimes than whites, which is why they're arrested more often. This can be confirmed through surveys asking people if they were a victim of a crime in the past year, and who the perpetrator was. So here is a question: can we judge individuals by this? Are stereotypes useful? Well, let's look at the arrest rates. And remember that these are multiples we're talking about here with this particular graph. You're 9 times more likely to be murdered by a black man than a white man. You're 4 times more likely to be raped by a black man than a white man. You're 9 times more likely to be robbed by a black man than a white man. You're 4 times more likely to be assaulted by a black man than a white man. And you're about 4 times more likely to have your car stolen by a black man than a white man. I personally think that these statistics mean that you have more reason to be concerned when you're walking down a dark alley and you look behind you and you see a black man than if you're walking down a dark alley and you look behind you and you see a white man. I do believe that in certain situations where you need to make quick judgments, it does make sense to profile in this way. It's not fair to profile. It is guilt by association. However, from a practical perspective, if you care about your life, then it does make sense to profile. So we have been compromising common sense. You may have noticed that in airports, we are routinely searching children. Quite invasive body searches that are happening now, especially in American airports. And why are we doing this to little kids? Profiling potential criminals, as FBI agents are trained to do, is considered discrimination if you work for airport security. They're not allowed to discriminate. We all know what the terrorists look like who we are scared are going to blow up airplanes and take airplanes hostage. We know what they look like. We could easily pick them out. I'm sure the people who are working in airport security know very well that 6-year-old white girls are not likely to have bombs on them. So they are forced to waste a lot of time, energy, and effort searching people who are very unlikely to be terrorists rather than spending all that energy on searching people who are more likely to be terrorists, all in the name of equality and not discriminating. So in summary, yes, race is a real biological fact, no matter how unpopular this view may be. Yes, there are significant differences between people of different racial groups. Yes, some races are more intelligent than others, even when accounting for socioeconomic differences. Yes, it sometimes is necessary to use stereotyping to make decisions, even though it's not fair. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.